Thank you all for being here today. My name is Chris Simmons. As you heard, I'm with the Department of Food Science and Technology. And it's a pleasure to be leading today's session on healthy foods and communities. And the session will be structured with 2 lightning talks, then we'll have a panel discussion and opportunity for audience Q&A. So let's go ahead and get into it. And I'm very happy to welcome to the podium Professor Claire Napawan from the Department of Human Ecology.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It was really exciting as a landscape architect to hear the word landscape repeated over and over again by Wade, so that $20 was worth it. No, I'm just kidding. So my name is Claire Napawan. I'm a landscape architect, urban designer, as well as a professor at the Department of Human Ecology here in UC Davis. And my outreach has focused predominantly on engaging diverse publics in building community resilience to a range of impacts related to our current climate crisis. I believe the greatest challenge to healthy food and healthy communities in the state of California is the threat of climate change. And so I'm just repeating the things that Kim and Wade already said. So for the past 10 years, I've been utilizing co-design and other participatory methods to address how communities maintain resilience to the complex socio-ecological challenges of climate risk, engaging specifically with urban youth, youth of color, and those from disadvantaged communities throughout the state. I believe addressing these risks through community engagement is key to building healthy communities, and I'll get to the food part in a bit. But when I first started this work about 10 years ago, the majority of young people that I worked with were able to tell me what climate change was, but not necessarily how it might impact them. Often, they identified melting polar ice caps, habitat loss, or tropical storms as evidence of climate risk. And by conceptualizing climate change at such global scales and in remote locations, this often meant that the same young people believed that the solutions to climate risks were the responsibility of scientists and politicians, that building healthy communities resilient to climate impacts is the work of, and I'm going to quote an Oakland workshop participant from 2015, the work of people smarter than me. However, we know that isn't true. Existing literature demonstrates that the best indicators of community resilience is social cohesion. In other words, an important measure of community resilience and community health is how well you know your neighbors. And what's equally significant about this finding is knowing the importance of social connection puts capacity back into the hands of these young people to participate in the planning and advocacy for a healthier future. So I've worked throughout the state of California collecting more nuanced, place-based, inclusive, and diverse narratives of what climate risk and resilience looks like. And I use a range of community engagement tools like social media and other things. And if I had hours to talk to you about it, I could, but I have 5 minutes. So to get straight to the point, over the course of many years, we've aggregated thousands of community-based conceptualizations of climate risk and resilience, conceptualizations that move beyond narratives of polar bears and politicians. And the bullet point in all of this work has been food is the single most prevalent theme when engaging young people in contemplating their personal experiences of climate risk and resilience. People's relationship to food had implications also for both mitigation and adaptation. So for example, you heard Kim talk about the cost of food. Climate change can make many more important foods more costly. And that was something that really resonated with young people, but also recognizing that personal food choices have a direct impact on greenhouse gas emissions and other mitigation approaches. So it's this really wonderful kind of cyclical loop that helped young people connect with and also gain capacity to understand their role in climate change. So another important relationship between food and climate resilience that surfaced in more recent work is food's ability to build community, communicate identity, and demonstrate values, which I think Kim spoke to a bit as well. Pictured here is a project completed in partnership with the Alameda Creek Conservancy and the Alameda County Water Control District, among a list of many other agencies. Started in 2017, it's meant to bring awareness of climate risk in the lower Alameda Creek watershed. It's working collaboratively with community members to imagine alternative futures that adapt to sea level rise, improve habitat for keystone species, which is predominantly steelhead trout in this area, and create equitable access to resources in the watershed. Excuse me. It's not lost on me Wade's point about Angelino's being so supportive of this landscape bridge. I think that's like a critical requirement for pushing these kinds of projects forward. So again, utilizing a broad range of place-based participatory activities. Again, I don't have time to describe what amounted to amazing design decisions that were collaboratively generated during the project, but I will share this other relevant discovery, which is recipe sharing became one of the most powerful engagement tools in this project. And those recipes articulated the cultural richness and diversity of the community. Furthermore, collectively sharing those meals became a powerful means to build a coalition advocating for a resilient future. And it is no small feat because this community were able to collectively advocate and secure $31.4 million in implementation funding from the state of California in 2019 and is currently at work at building this portion of Eden's Landing. It's a wetland in this watershed to help prevent impacts related to sea level rise. So in today's panel, I hope you consider all the many ways we might measure the role of food in a community beyond calories and yield. Consider how social cohesion, identity, accessibility, and cultural relevance are also important ways to qualify food. For me, food has become the gateway drug, as I refer to it, for connecting communities with issues related to climate change and a cornerstone topic for collaboratively building resilient and healthy communities. Thank you.
Much, Claire, great introduction to start thinking about this very complex topic. And I'm also delighted to welcome our next lightning speaker, Professor Lauren Au from the Department of Nutrition.
Hello, good to see everyone. So my work is focused on improving the dietary intake and health of low-income mothers and children in California. And one program that has the largest impact in California is WIC, or Women's, Infants, and Children. And through WIC, families receive nutrition education. They also receive a food package that includes fruits and vegetables, grains, milk, eggs, and other staples. And during the COVID pandemic, we researched how the WIC program helped provide more flexibility to Californians through access to telehealth services, so people couldn't come into their appointments, so the WIC offices had to pivot to do nutrition education online or over the phone, as well as increasing the amount of money to purchase fresh fruits and vegetables, going from $9 a month, and I just want you to think for a moment how much $9 a month could buy you in fresh fruits and vegetables, because that was the amount pre-pandemic, to more than $20 a month. So in partnership with our community partner, Los Angeles WIC, we found that these changes helped reduce food insecurity in WIC families during a time of increased need. And this work was recently awarded a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Research Impact Award by combining forces with academia and community partners to have a real impact on WIC families in California. And just this month, our research helped support the permanent increase for fresh fruits and vegetables from $9 a month to now $26 a month for not just all California WIC families, but across the nation. So we are thrilled that our research had such positive impact. And if you were able to see my PhD candidate's poster, she was presenting some of that work here today. A second area of my research is improving dietary technology to improve dietary intake for Californians. So if you're looking at this picture, it might look familiar to you if you've ever eaten in any of the UC Davis dining halls. So what we're doing is this summer, we're piloting an artificial intelligence app that would take pictures of commonly consumed foods in the UC Davis dining halls, like pictured here, and estimate nutrient intake, such as calories. So currently, this AI technology has been validated in other countries such as Ghana and Vietnam, but it's never been tested in the US. So we're really excited to be able to pilot this in our dining commons here. And I just want you to think for a moment how this could revolutionize the way that not just college students eat, but everyone eats, if we're able to make this go further. So this is just some screenshots of what that app would look like. So the overall goal of this project is to nudge people towards healthier choices. So you might start with setting a dietary goal. So maybe one of your goals would be having more diversity, so having more fruits and vegetables, having more whole grains in your diet. Then you take a picture of your meal. So we all, I don't know, just show of hands, who takes pictures of their food? Okay, so maybe it's skewed because we're in ag and environmental sciences, but in nutrition, almost all the students all raise their hand. And you take a picture of your food, and it would estimate the portion size and amount of food. And so what we would do was you would be able to use that information, and it would track against your goals. So you could get a daily feedback, you could get a weekly feedback. So I'm gonna show you what this looks like in terms of how the AI technology is registering sort of what is in the food. So you'll see that this is a plate, this is in the Ghana study. They have a bowl of food, and then the AI system is creating these color blocks. You kind of think of paint by numbers, and what it's doing is it's recognizing what that food class is. So we have to train the computer to be able to recognize all these different foods. And this is just showing the app sort of in like a fast forward scenario of you entering the food, it's giving you information, and then in the long run, it's gonna give you nutrient information that comes back to you. So on the right is sort of a screenshot of what that nutrient information would look like in the overall feedback. So we're really excited about this. We're just in the beginning stages, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask later. And lastly, I just want to highlight the amazing students in my lab, one who's here today. As a faculty member and a woman of color, I know how important it is to mentor students from diverse backgrounds, and I feel very fortunate to be in such a collaborative environment at UC Davis, at the Department of Nutrition, and have the opportunity to train the next generation of scientists in nutrition and public health. And with that, thank you.
Much, Lauren. And at this stage, I'd like to invite our full panel up to be seated. So to start things off, why don't we just give some brief self-introductions, talk a bit about your background, the work that you're doing now, and Brittany, perhaps we can start with you.
You have to hold it. I think I chose the wrong seat. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brittany Chambers-Butcher. I am an assistant professor here at UC Davis in the Department of Human Ecology. And I have a PhD in community health, so everything that I do really focuses on community and bringing them into the research space. The work that I am primarily interested in is understanding how racism impacts maternal and child health outcomes with the goal of trying to identify new potential pathways as well as inform interventions both on the clinical level as well as within the community. And so I'm excited to be here today to provide that perspective in the conversation that we're having today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tim Beatty. I'm a professor in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics. I'm also director of the Gifford Center for Population Studies. My work focuses on, so I'm an economist. My work focuses on sort of the federal food assistance programs. I'm sort of an applied microeconomist, and so I apply sort of quantitative models and bring sort of big data to bear on questions about how policy affects sort of how the food people choose, and increasingly how it's important to remember SNAP or CalFresh is just a huge part of the food economy. It's essentially $1 in $10 for food at home it comes from the CalFresh program or from SNAP. And so increasingly I'm working on how does that affect sort of the food retail space. And we know a lot about how it affects people. It tends to help them, but we don't know a lot about how it affects retailers and supply chains. And so that's been an area of active research at the moment.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Falbe. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Human Ecology. I'm a nutritional epidemiologist and behavioral researcher by training, and I'm so thrilled to be at UC Davis and in California, where California really serves as a living laboratory for food policy innovation. So my work focuses on developing and evaluating innovative food policies that try to prevent chronic diseases, but also try to address some of the climate and other environmental risks we were talking about. And much of my work involves working directly with community organizations who advocate for these policies.
All sounds tremendously fascinating. I'm looking forward to this. I'm Christine Diepenbrock, an assistant professor in plant sciences here at UC Davis. And our lab is focused on improving nutritional quality in crops. So we're working on both staple crops, which would be kind of a primary source of daily calories in many parts of the world, and what we would call specialty crops, of course, which California has many, many strengths in. And so we're also thinking through how do we help improve human nutritional status through plant-based foods in a way that is configured for both kind of regular, near daily, or at least once a week consumption versus these situations of occasional consumption. So we do quite a bit of bean breeding and are also partnered with breeding programs for leafy greens, among other crops here on campus.
My name is Alfred Melbourne. I'm the founder and director of Three Sisters Gardens. We're a native indigenous-led nonprofit working with the At Potential High Promise Youth in West Sacramento. So we teach them how to grow, harvest, and distribute organic vegetables. Currently, we do that using 4 urban farms, and our goal is to have 50. And so building a real food sovereignty system in Yolo County, right underneath the eye of the capital of the state of California. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jesus Barajas. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Environmental Science and Policy. I'm trained as an urban planner, so I think very much more about the community aspect of our conversation today, and the work that I do is centrally focused on equity and transportation equity. I think about how people get around, what some of the barriers are to how people move about, particularly as in California, we're shifting towards sustainable modes and thinking about the electrification of our vehicle fleet to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And I also do a bit of work in understanding how policy metrics in policy and how policy and planning can impact equitable outcomes in communities.
So much. And I will just briefly note that I also do work under the AES, and my focus is food sustainability with an emphasis on capturing food waste and adding value to it. So when you think of current law under AB 1826, SB 1383, very strong drivers for landfill diversion of organic matter. And so a lot of what we do in my group is matching the physical, chemical, and biological properties of different food waste streams to their highest value recycling opportunity. But the topic of today is really healthy foods and healthy communities. And healthy is a complex term. There's not necessarily a very simple one-dimensional definition for what it means to have healthy food or healthy communities. And so I'd just like to invite each panelist to say a bit about what that nexus between healthy foods and communities means to you in the context of your work. And we'll start with the other side of the table this time with Jesus.
Sure, thanks. As I mentioned just a moment ago, I do think about communities, and I think about I think about the term access. And the work I do, another way to frame the work I do in transportation equity is at the intersection of environmental justice and transportation. So I'm thinking about communities and community environments where people live, work, and play kind of free from environmental burdens, free from racism, classism, all the isms in the environmental justice language. Everyone has participation in decision-making and power in that decision-making process. But then I think about all of that in terms of access. So what are the access to levers of power? What is access in terms of physical access? Can you get to a destination of opportunity? And in our conversation today, we're thinking about food as a destination of opportunity. So what sort of food outlets do you have access to, and what sort of access do those food outlets provide? So that's sort of how I would frame health and thinking about that nexus is access.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think, so we talk about healthy soil, healthy food, healthy communities, and bringing people together so that we're going to be in charge of our own destiny, basically, by controlling our own food source. So as we mentioned, I mentioned a few minutes ago, we have 4 urban farms, but wanting 50 to be able to build a food sovereign system, bringing people out and working together, creating this system. I just feel like, when we have more access to the land, that's going to make it possible. Breaking down that barrier, that's been one of the huge handicaps or just challenges trying to get access to that land. But we talk about you want to have a healthy community, you want to have healthy young people and even older people, everybody has to eat. So for us, it's going to be creating, a diversified food system in our communities run by the people, Recently, I was asked, we're called Three Sisters Gardens, and why weren't we called Three Sisters Farms? Because I used the history of the Victory Gardens during World War II that people relied upon to grow food. And so that's why we get our name, Three Sisters Gardens, and of course, relying upon the Native Indigenous knowledge and wisdom. So thank you.
So in our breeding efforts for improving crop nutritional quality and helping to get to this healthy food, at least at the initial at-harvest level, we're often talking about improving the concentration of the nutrient, meaning that per unit of the same food consumed, you're going to get more of that given nutrient. So that's one way that we're not asking people necessarily. We need colleagues in nutrition and social sciences to help think about, are people changing their diets over time? But our thought with breeding is let's build more nutrition into what people are already eating without assuming or expecting of anyone any behavior or dietary change. So that has been one way that we've done things. However, we do also have to make sure that added nutrition does make it all the way to the consumer upon time of when they're actually eating that food. So we just submitted a manuscript right before this session where we got to work with Dr. Gail Bornhorst and team in food science and technology and bio and ag engineering and tested beans, like your kidney pinto bean style beans, through effectively a robot stomach. So they have a really nice simulator in their lab that mimics the wave-like contractions of our digestive tract. We're able to make sure as the nutrients are actually released from the food matrix and from those beans, how much is actually going to be available to a presumed human consumer. Of course, there's diversity there in each of us as well with regards to how everything is working. But 2 other points I'll mention real quick. We're also looking at climate change effects on effectively the nutritional content of the food to make sure that this healthy food is also sustainable in the long term and being built in a way that's climate resilient. And then finally, I think for some of us, the healthy food in communities, we work a fair amount with growers, especially of beans, is making sure that there is this kind of ecosystem between the food, nutritional, and farm economic security of trying to think along the kind of supply and demand streams of how ag and food systems are taking place. So that's some of what we think through on a pretty regular basis.
And I do a lot of work with communities, and a priority for a lot of places is not just having access to healthy foods, but also having freedom from targeted marketing and excessive saturation of less healthy foods, and making sure that the retail and the restaurant environment has adequate variety and options of healthy foods that really meet individuals' preferences, but that are also culturally relevant. The other piece of healthy foods and healthy communities is really autonomy. And like our other panelists said, really having a democratic process where the community can help determine what kind of food environment and what kind of food system they want for themselves. And really what I've seen in my research with communities is that what they want really aligns with the science of what we know is healthful and can reduce risk of chronic disease. But they're also really wanting to focus on sustainable choices. There's a lot of interest in communities in reducing plastic waste and really making climate-friendly options more widely available.
A hard question, so I punted a little bit and tried to make it an easier question for myself. And so for me, it really means it's a technical question. This is something I'm currently working on a project sponsored by the Food and Nutrition Service of the USDA in a group project working on the definition and a reevaluation of what's called a thrifty food plan. And for those of you who don't know, the Thrifty Food Plan actually forms the basis of the SNAP allotment. So if you've ever wondered, why do SNAP participants get a certain amount of money every month? It's essentially based on a model diet that has been proposed and has kind of not really been changed. It's the kind of diet you'd get if you asked an economist what's the best way to eat. So it's really efficient, but maybe not super delicious. And so we're working on essentially a project to methodologically think about how might we reevaluate the Thrifty Food Plan, to incorporate things like preparation time, which is something that isn't incorporated in the current version of the Thrifty Food Plan. It often has a lot of things like beans, but unprepared because they're inexpensive. And so it's literally solving a computer program to minimize the cost. And so dry beans are very inexpensive. Also to think about things like access to equipment to prepare food. That's not really built into the current version of the Thrifty Food Plan. So, just real methodological questions about how do you introduce these sorts of constraints into, a computer program that is going to determine the value of how much money the sort of millions of people who participate in the SNAP program get on a monthly basis. So it's really fundamental work, but it really does go to the question, but it's a very sort of technical version of the answer. So
I absolutely love this question and being last. When I think about this particular question around what is healthy foods in communities and how you defined it, it often has me think about who has been left out of these conversations and who is kind of framing, what healthy food looks like. And so from my perspective, defining healthy food is really food that nourishes a person's soul, that's connected to their ancestral roots, and that provides nutrients for their body to have energy to do their day-to-day task, as well as contribute to their overall health and well-being. And I think healthy foods and healthy communities connect when we think about reproductive justice. So a lot of my work is centered on reproductive justice, and it's a framework that looks at human rights and intersectional theories that was founded by Black women that really says that, we have the right to decide when or when not to have children and to raise our children in safe and healthy communities. And when you think about that, one thing that comes up, right, is how food insecurity may impact someone's choices across the reproductive lifespan. But really, in order for us to think about all of these things, we need to first look at this equity lens, look at, what are historical roots that have taken and stripped things away from communities. And as panelists have shared, really where communities are leading, communities know what's needed for them, what works best for them. The solutions are in the community. And so when we're thinking about healthy communities is where you see communities who are activated, who feel like they have the support and resources to really be active and involved in their communities. And also that means, right, having quality education as well as high quality medical care, being able to actually use your community to exercise, to bike, and then also, right, to have choices in your community to really support your definition of healthy foods and what that looks like for you. And then also thinking about the way that structural racism impacts economic wealth and mobility across generations, right? Being able to have access to employment that really allows people to really be able to access things that will contribute to the health and well-being of their families.
Wonderful, thank you. And we heard several panelists mention these external linkages, these partnerships and collaborations beyond the university. And since the goal of the AES is to deliver actionable knowledge and real solutions, those partnerships are key. And the work that we do off campus is just as important as what happens on campus itself. Would any panelists like to expand on their external partnerships and how it's enhanced and expanded their own work?
Well, for us, being a food sovereignty movement, we're growing food in the community. We've reached out to local organizations that work with food insecure families and or unhoused organizations or individuals to distribute our food. So that's been an amazing kind of connection and partnership for us. Being able to build that support in the farm or on the farm, and then growing the food, and then having these partners to hand things off to that really have kind of found the folks that are in need. So good partnerships like that are really good, because we don't have to do everything, kind of spreading ourselves out and working with the groups out there that are already doing good work. So.
And I'll add to that. One of the organizations I work with is called Bay Area Community Resources. They focus on youth empowerment, and they invited me to work with them on a project that they were really leading to. They were advocating for a healthy checkout policy that would set some reasonable nutritional standards for what products can be placed at store checkouts. So I don't know if you all know, when you go to the grocery store, you may think it's kind of a neutral environment, but actually, like, where products are placed, especially at checkout, it's paid for through contracts. That's why you often don't see like healthier items at checkout. You tend to see kind of the items that may be more likely to trigger impulse purchases. So this youth organization got involved in trying to advocate for policy change. They brought me on board, and I helped them with developing the policy and helping them analyze some of their citizen science that they collected themselves. And together we spoke with city council, and eventually the policy passed. And we've just seen, because of that, I'm now doing an evaluation of the policy, and we've been taking before and after pictures of these checkouts. This was passed in the city of Berkeley, and it's just dramatic, the changes we see. Just the before and after is incredible. And because of the work this youth organization did, this policy is now being explored and adopted by other jurisdictions in California. So Paris, California is the second city to adopt this. And there's, just the youth are still working on this in other counties and cities.
I have a longtime partnership with Black Infant Health, which is an organization that only exists in California. It's actually a program that really focuses on supporting Black women and birthing people throughout their pregnancy as well as postpartum periods. And I got to talk with women in both Oakland and Fresno to reconceptualize structural racism from their experiences. And I do just want to read a quote to kind of share what came out of this when you partner with community with trying to define or reconceptualize anything. So our postpartum group in Oakland defined structural racism as a silent opportunity killer that regulates access to resources, better education, and safe neighborhoods for a particular race. And so for me, right, my scientist brain went off, and I was like, wow, there are so many ways that we can work through this and work on this. But I didn't do that alone. I had them think about how, based on their definitions, do they feel like structural racism shows up in their community. And community infrastructure was one of the domains that came about. And they really highlighted issues that has already been shared on this panel, where they say in communities that are predominantly Black that there are not a lot of really healthy food options, like they live in food deserts. There's a lot of fast food. They also said that there is not space anywhere to have a community garden and or for their children to play. And so when we think about ways to intervene, right, we first have to have communities identify the problem. I did also continue to work with them to use a strategy called research prioritization for effective communities, to work with them to identify recommendations that they would have to address issues that came up in every single one of the domains. And related to today's topic, they feel like it was really important to have Black-centered community gardens, Black-centered programs that educated not only children but also families on, how to create healthful meals that still focuses in on, their ancestral roots. And so this is a way that I've been able to use research as well as long-term community partnerships to not only identify problems but also solutions.
So a lot of my work involves working with sort of state or federal implementing agencies. One particular example was I have a student who spent 3 years commuting out to Nantomas to work in the CDPH offices. And so she was working on the WIC program, which Lauren described so nicely, and working with sort of the base case files. So basically the raw data of every participant in WIC in California over the last 20 years. And looking at questions of the effects of changes in the food environment on people's participation in WIC. And so this was a question that CDPH was very interested in. It's also of academic interest. Sort of causally identifying the effect of the food environment is we all think it should matter, but actually causally identifying that effect is really challenging. And so what my student was able to show is that when sort of a store that you frequent often as a participant in WIC exits the program, you are much less likely to continue on as a WIC participant going forward. And so you and your children lose out on those benefits going forward. And that we know has sort of long-run negative health consequences. So that was, really sort of scientifically interesting, but it was also really interesting to CDPH.
I'll add one way that I've engaged external partners in the work that I've done is almost all of my work is applied research in support of some sort of policy-related evaluation or analysis. And for almost all of my projects, we bring in community partners who sit on our projects as advisory members or full participants in the research. So for one example, we were asked by the California Air Resources Board to conduct a study that examines the barriers to access to zero-emission vehicles among low-income and disadvantaged communities, where we have a executive order in California mandate to get all new vehicle sales by 2035 to be zero emission. And a concern with that is that the lowest income groups are going to be left out of that transition, contributing to environmental injustices. And so we invited self-help enterprises, which operates a number of social supportive housing developments in the Central Valley in California, as well as Transform, which is a transportation advocacy organization in the San Francisco Bay Area, to help advise us on some of the questions that we might ask of communities to engage to find members of those communities. And their work has been really instrumental in helping shape what we know about those barriers, where it was assumed to be primarily cost, but actually a lot of the barriers are about knowledge of electric vehicles, the kinds that are available, what it means if they hear on the news that a battery explodes, does that mean it's safe? Really, they're seeking knowledge about this information. So those partnerships have been really instrumental in the research. And I will add quickly, I do teach on campus and engage at times with community groups. So we worked in a community-engaged environmental justice course with Valley Vision in Sacramento to help with their AB 617 community air grant program analysis, and they were able to achieve funding in the next round of the grant. Maybe not because of our work, but at least we helped them along the way to get there.
I'll make two quick mentions. One is a literal station related mention with regards to the ag experiment stations. So several of us in the plant side of things have been using the UC Ag and Natural Resources Research and Extension Centers, so the REC system throughout the state. Those have been absolutely instrumental to our field-based research. So our lab, even in the past few years, has already worked at 3 of those, spanning from kind of the Fresno, Coalinga area up to Tule Lake, all the way at the Oregon border, and they go as far south as Imperial down the desert REC. So those have been helpful not only for field experimentation along, say, an environmental gradient with different temperatures and such, but also literally it brings us and our plant materials to that area, and we get to have field days and talk with the farmers there. They get to evaluate the plots in the field. We haven't, at least speaking for ourselves, gotten to where people can actually taste the product. The timing usually isn't right to be able to see the plants and taste the product at the same time. So we're getting there. But that relates to the other point I wanted to mention. We have a pretty massive project in lima bean going on right now. So we do have an active lima bean breeding program here at UC Davis. And we were awarded a Specialty Crop Research Initiative project led by Dr. Paul Gepps, who's a professor emeritus here. But one of the 3 actual components of that project is assessing consumer perception of lima beans. And it's kind of twofold, what is the current status and what can we do about it is kind of what we're going for there. So we're partnering with kind of chefs, culinary experts, food scientists to try to, again, figure out what actually is present in the lima bean currently, at least the ones in market. What do we have present among the diverse lima beans in the USDA collection of limas, most of which won't flower in the summers here, so we're working on that part too. So again, as we find out a lot more about this plant material, which was collected by various people, and they're involved in the process as well, what can we do about improving this crop pretty holistically in a way that, again, everybody can kind of get on board with, whether it's for one value-added trait or another. But I also won't pretend that all of these are just win-win scenarios. Sometimes we have trade-offs in different traits, and I think that's why it's the way that some of these folks have mentioned, to have various people in the room and having power in the decision-making when you're deciding what lines are actually going to make it out to market. The earlier we can get that feedback in the breeding process, the better for, again, getting those diversity of products we care about all the way to your shelves.
Thank you. That's a great cross-section of all the different ways that our faculty are connecting across the public and private sectors. I appreciated the insight into some of the work going on specifically with underserved communities. And I'm wondering if any panelists might be able to expand on their strategies for opening channels with underserved communities in California and how you bring them into your work.
I want to start off by inviting them to the table and giving them a seat so that we can hear their voice. A lot of times that, we think that we know what's best for somebody else when they know what's best for themselves. So, there's a lot of unhoused folks in California, and, there's a lot of resources out here. A lot of times, we're missing them entirely. So, yeah, definitely want to talk about bringing the folks that have the most experience into the room in dealing with these issues so that, they can help themselves. And that's always going to be one of the first answers from me.
I always keep an eye out for grant opportunities that can help fund both the research but also the important work that community organizations are doing. So I work with, I have a colleague, Mary Minkler, and we had worked on, we were both members of a coalition in the Tenderloin in San Francisco called the Tenderloin Healthy Corner Store Coalition. It was a food justice coalition, and we got funding to help support some of their work converting corner stores in their neighborhoods into healthy retailers. And through getting that grant and helping fund the coalition to hire local residents to be food justice leaders, to work with corner stores, that eventually led to the passage of an ordinance that continued to fund these corner store conversions in one of the poorest neighborhoods in San Francisco where there is no full-service grocery store. So through this work, we really saw, as these corner stores, if they converted, they would get over $10,000 in resources from the city to get new fridge units, to get training on produce handling, and they had to reduce the amount of shelf space for tobacco and alcohol while increasing the shelf space for fruits and vegetables and other healthy foods. They got connected with local farmers through produce markets, and we saw that not only the stores that were converted became healthier, but it had a ripple effect where it appeared to sort of transform the healthfulness of the food environment beyond just the stores immediately involved. And that was really, work that was being led in the community, but that I, got to help evaluate and work with them on it.
I would say one way that I engage community now is through what is called a community research model. I currently have a grant funded by the UC President's Office to really formalize this model that I've used. And really what it does is training community members to be partners in the research. So teaching them how to actually collect research, teach them how to design surveys, interview guides, teaching them how to analyze the data, walking them through the dissemination process where they serve as co-authors. The study that I shared findings from before, that was the first time I used community researchers as a postdoc. Since then, I've also used them for my K work around developing and piloting racial equity training. I'm also currently using it now when we designed and are implementing and expanding an income supplement program for pregnant people in California called the Abundant Birth Project. And it has been such a rewarding experience because it is a way to kind of have community at the table and be in the day-to-day, which is important to community. They said they want us to be transparent. They want to be in these things. They want to be involved. They don't want decisions made about them, their community, their data without them being at the table. It also helps contribute with capacity building, which right now I'm undertaking a beast of a grant with one of the community partners. It's actually the first funding mechanism I've ever seen by the American Heart Association, where it's requiring an academic and a CBO project, right? And so being able to take this community research model, have taught community partners how to do research, and now helping them be a PI of their own grant.
I'll echo the need to apply for funding or write in community organizations as advisors in research grants. Again, like I mentioned in response to the previous question, almost all of my research incorporates that community aspect. The other thing, or the other way that I engage with underserved communities is through other partnerships on campus. So one of the research groups I'm affiliated with, the Institute of Transportation Studies, runs an environmental justice fellows program where they bring in community leaders from across California and across the country in a year-long cohort model, partially remote, partially on campus. These are community leaders working in environmental justice, and they engage with researchers on campus, me, other folks who do work in transportation and environmental justice, And out of those organizations, we invite them on community advisory panels, but we also brainstorm ideas for how to solve community needs through a research community partnership. So those networks, those other networks on campus are vital.
Quick mention, so our lab has been working quite a bit with plant breeders in the tropics and subtropics, and then also with their social science colleagues there on site, namely in West, East, and Southern Africa. I would note, though, it's been really critical to have those partnerships. I alluded earlier to the staple versus occasional consumption. So yes, we work on those kidney pinto beans, et cetera, here in California, but also they're a much more prevalent part of the diet in parts of East Africa, for instance. So it turns out we have some of the same traits or properties of the food that we care about. A big one that's a focus in both places is the cooking time of these beans. So there is this convenience factor, but there, again, could also be trade-offs. You may not want the absolute fastest cooking bean ever. So we need to find that optimum and talk to a lot of people who are cooking these beans regularly and have them testing firsthand. So these partnerships have been really critical for getting the domestic improvement while also working with people with whom this is really affecting their diet too. And they've got a lot of really nice studies they've already done in their own environments too. I also wanted to highlight the SCOPE program here on campus. So this is a student collaborative organic plant breeding education project, which is now in its third term. It's gotten renewed twice, thankfully. And that's led by Dr. Charlie Brummer in plant sciences, but was explicitly designed to train grad and undergrad students in plant breeding for organic cropping systems in California, and especially in crops for which there has not been as much historical improvement. So there are some culturally responsive breeding efforts that are built into that, and of various different crops, the students are actually getting firsthand hands-on training, including with ag practitioners, people who are growing these crops on their farm. Quick last mention is I want to highlight, this is a program again by a couple of colleagues, Dr. Diane Beckles and Dr. John Harada, have a program called the Plant Ag Biology Grad Admissions Pathways Program, also known as PABGAP. So they're bringing students in for summer research experiences here from a couple of the 1890 land-grant institutions, one of whom actually just wrote up from Fort Valley State University an AI capacity building grant, which they just found out got funded, but the AI Institute for Next Gen Food Systems here on campus is partnered with them. We're looking forward to seeing what they have in mind for that. But this AI space is kind of a huge one, but I think keeping it as grounded as possible with regards to what's the value add in making sure this food is healthy and sustaining our souls, as said, and bodies, and the things we would like to go about in our communities.
So one project that sort of brings together two of my sort of research themes is we're working with Fresno County to look at churn in CalFresh participation among farm workers. And so what is churn? Churn is sort of the process by which people enroll in the program and then disenroll in the program and then re-enroll in the program. And ideally that you would never see this disenrolling in the program, because what that means is someone is foregoing the benefits that they're probably entitled to. And it also means that it increases administrative costs of these programs dramatically. Actually, California has some of the highest rates of churn anywhere in the country, and sort of if you can reduce these costs, it makes these programs much more efficient and delivers more benefits to people. And so what we see is that farm workers, on average, churn at about 1.4 times the rate of sort of other participants in Fresno. But that peaks and goes up to about twice the rate of churn during harvest season. And so this is really preliminary, and we can't make sort of rigorous causal claims about any of this, and that's kind of the thing I would really like to do. So if you know anyone at CDSS who's willing to share the data, put out the good word for me, because there's competing mechanisms here. One is farm workers' earnings are really lumpy. And it could just be the case that there's a very short amount of time that they actually earn a bit too much to qualify. But then, of course, the rest of the year they don't earn enough. And so this sort of spike in their earnings actually might rule them out. Another, probably both are going on, is simply working too much and they simply can't make it into the office for their recertification interviews. We can't really, at the moment, tell you what's going on, but that's sort of an active area of research, and it's a group of people who have historically not really had access to the CalFresh program, and often when we're looking at these households, it's not these are often they're sort of children-only households, and so what these are is households where the parents are undocumented people and the children are citizens, and so they're eligible or entitled to CalFresh. And so, yeah, trying to think through policy solutions to this sort of churning pattern, which would make, everybody, is sort of real front of brain at the moment.
Thank you. And now that we've had an opportunity to hear about the amazing work that you're all doing, I'd like to invite the audience to join the discussion and invite you to ask questions, not just of our panelists, but of our lightning speakers as well.
Really, really briefly, I would love to hear a few words from each of you about what is most rewarding about the work you're doing.
I love it all.
I like being able to work with the youth and watching their face light up when they can see the power they have and being able to grow food and distribute it. So, yeah, it's really amazing.
The work is a public service, and I mean, I think it's important, and I value that.
Actually seeing the food environment change before our eyes in a positive way for human and planetary health, and then seeing, policy change in a way that further facilitates that in California and beyond.
I think I tend to work on things that seem super esoteric to a lot of people, and but they have incredibly important implications for how people actually receive benefits. So I helped with how do you adjust the SNAP benefits for Alaska and Hawaii, right? It's a technical question of index number theory, which I happen to find really cool. But it actually changed the amount of money that, benefit people who receive SNAP and in Hawaii and in Alaska get. And so it's my salary comes from the taxpayers, both sort of federally and from the state. And, I just feel it's incumbent upon me to work for them and try to make the public services that we have as effective as possible and as equitable as possible and as as efficient as possible. No one wants to waste the taxpayers.
I would say mine is moments where community partners let me know that I'm doing the right thing. An example of this is when I went to talk with the group, the first focus group. They're like, what are you going to do with this data? And I was like, I'm going to be honest. I do want to publish some of this data, but I also want to partner with you and take you along the journey with me and be able to transform your community. And I paid for a group of Fresno to get on the bus to come to Oakland for a dissemination event. And they're like, I've never seen what happened to my data before. Like, people always come and they take it. And then the second thing that was like a aha moment is like, I never knew that this many people cared about me. And so if you're familiar with Oakland's Preservation Park, the largest room, and it was standing room only. And they're just like, wow, it is a lot of people who care about me, who care about my story, who want to help. And so those are moments that keep me in the work.
Yeah, I have to chime in on that as well. If you're going to be working in food and in particular food sustainability, California is a perfect foundation for that. And there's this really exciting convergence right now in terms of community awareness and priorities and regulation and policy and industry goals, where they're all starting to move in the same sustainable direction. And if you're going to be working in food and sustainability in California, Davis is the place to be. And the century-plus legacy of this university and this college, working hand in hand with the surrounding community and partners, it just removes so many different barriers so that you can focus on doing the work, translating your solutions, seeing them put into action. And so it's just been immensely satisfying, and it's made me grateful to be a part of this institution.
I have a more detailed answer if there's 10 seconds for it as well. I don't want to delay. Okay. I would say as well, it's really been interesting to see how the different work that we're doing, it can be something, something we initially planned on focusing on, or it can be a tiny piece of something we're doing that ends up being like absolutely game-changing for someone. So finding those little threads, whether it's across, different of us on this panel have very different fields that we work in, or someone in the community who wants to take something and really go far with it. Those little moments can, emerge over time or suddenly, and it's been really interesting to see.
So, Tim, I had a question. Did you say you helped increase the amount from $6 to $26? Who was that? Okay, Lauren. What did they expect you to be able to buy with $26? And I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, what are the other supplements that have to be coming in? Because I can't think of a single store that, I could feed for a month on $26. So help us understand what else is available.
Thank you for the question, Dean. It was $9, which is not that much more than the $6 that you thought. And this was pre-pandemic, but food prices have not, they're still very high. They were still high before the pandemic. And it went up to $26. And the amount that they chose was based on the National Academies had done a report and said that at the time it was maybe $23 would be half the amount of money you would need to purchase fresh fruits and vegetables for a household. But this report was back in 2017. So that price has changed. The other sources of money that they're expecting to come is so WIC is a supplemental program. So it's not supposed to provide all of the funds you would need. Some households do qualify for also SNAP, for example. So they imagine that they could be getting foods from both programs. But yes, it's not a lot of money, and we're really happy for the increase.
Hi, thank you all so much. From what I take away is that you're kind of looking at this from an affordability and accessibility and an appeal to culture and society across the food. And are there any models or tools that can help us evaluate a food or an organization or a project and look at these different boxes across, a triple bottom line or the UN SDGs? So to say, even not just what's the cost of this at a thrift level, but could you get down to like the cost per nutrient? So if I need vitamin C, what's the cheapest way for me to get it? Or if I need a culturally relevant food, how far is it away? Are there any things where you guys actually tie these together in a model or a tool?
That's a really good question.
Technically, the Thrifty Food Plan sort of does some of that. Just mechanically, the way it's constructed is it's solving a constrained optimization problem, and you can have not as many, but you can have constraints in there that are palatability and sort of minimum sort of nutrient quality. And one of the, I would say, criticisms of the Thrifty Food Plan is that so there is something called the Healthy Eating Index. The Healthy Eating Index of the Thrifty Food Plan is about 95 out of 100. It solves out to about 95 out of 100. Anyone want to take a crack at what the average Healthy Eating Index is in the US? Yeah, it's like 52 to 56, depending on which version you look at. So it turns out it generates a diet that doesn't look, it's a very healthy diet, but it's not one that lots of people eat. And a lot of that is actually because they impose these sort of diet quality constraints on the diet. It has to satisfy certain minimum dietary thresholds so that it is nutritious according to CNPP. Center for Nutrition Policy.
Is there anything tying environment, like how far this food traveled or environmental impact on when you purchase a food, or is there any legislation to look at that?
No, there isn't in the TFP. It's a kind of a controversial topic in that it turns out transportation is really, really efficient and is actually sort of transporting, growing things in an inefficient way and transporting them a short distance often has a worse sort of climate impact than growing things in a very efficient way and transporting them a longer distance. If you actually look at the total cost of
I'm curious about food deserts, and I've always been kind of, it seems like a captivating idea that there are these areas where people are unable to get access to good, nutritious food in cities. And I'm curious whether the panel thinks, is this an oversimplification? And I was struck by many of the things you've been talking about are based on target groups that are underserved rather than target neighborhoods or thinking about the food supply in different areas. So I'm curious to hear what the panel thinks about food deserts, and are they really the what we need to tackle to get to the problem of a healthy food supply?
Well, I'm forgetting exactly how the USDA defines food desert, but it's something like if you're within a half mile of a full-service grocery store or a mile of a food service grocery store. That doesn't account for how you get there to the store. So if you, for example, don't have access to a car and that half mile crosses a freeway barrier, do you really have access to that store? So that's one portion of it, and I'll leave it to the other panelists to talk.
I would say to your question that I would definitely love to put in this space that food deserts are a result of structural racism. And so, there's so much research that shows that predominantly communities of color live in food deserts. And I would say that some of Dr. Falbe's work, too, around advertisement in those particular communities, what stores are available in those communities where people typically buy groceries from corner stores. And so just wanting to, I feel like that was like one of the questions that you asked, like, well, like, what is the cause of this as it relates to underserved communities, and it's a direct result of structural racism. So yeah.
I'll just be the economist again. Economists are increasingly skeptical that food deserts are important to solve by using supply-side means, by which I mean subsidizing the creation of new supermarkets. That we actually, there's a lot of research showing that when a supermarket opens, most people opens in your area. Most people don't actually change their sort of shopping patterns. They actually tend to keep shopping where they were shopping anyway. What will often happen is if sort of a food desert is closed, people won't actually change. It doesn't have much of an effect on diet quality. People will tend to shift from store brands to national brands. So they'll buy higher quality items, but the actual sort of HEI score doesn't change all that much. Done some work looking at sort of the cost effectiveness of sort of subsidies to open stores versus the cost of simply giving, how much money would you have to give people such that they would eat as if they had access to a supermarket, so they have, it turns out to be just a lot more cost effective to transfer money to folks directly on average. Because we also have some work to show that it works for a lot of people, but it definitely doesn't work for everybody, particularly as was mentioned by one of the earlier keynotes, seniors and folks who don't have access to transportation. they kind of get left behind by those sort of direct support policies rather than subsidies of opening new stores.
And another term that some of the community groups I work with will use is food swamp, or food apartheid, to refer to their neighborhoods. Because there are some healthy foods. They may be harder to find in the stores, but they're almost getting drowned out by the less healthy options. And so that's sort of that's a problem in a lot of neighborhoods. And maybe one of the solutions is policies and programs that really help to shift the food environment in all retail spaces to make the healthier options more convenient, easier to find, a larger ratio of all the options available within a store, for example.
Yeah, I'm just surprised that we have these words that exist today. When we have such, huge expanse of land and resources and tools out there, and just leads to, the conclusion that, a lot of this stuff is by design, so we know that if you feed a kid better, they perform better, test scores go up and behavioral problems go down. So we need to really talk about also educating our community and letting them know the reasons why we have these huge marketing and advertising firms and entities that are constantly shoving this stuff down the throats or putting it in the faces of, our community and future leaders, and so it's easy for them to want to make bad choices, but, it's about educating them and involving them in the decisions, and then, creating access to this food. I know that we live in a food desert, and I speak on that a lot, but, trying to transform a food desert into a food oasis, and really just, it's going to be a big educational effort as much as, we have a lot of resources. It's still, making sure they understand.
It's been an extremely enlightening panel, and I really appreciate your time and talking about the breadth of your expertise and the impact that you've had. So please join me in thanking our panelists.